For my parents' extravagantly lavish 40th anniversary gala, I flew exactly 500 miles across the country, carrying nothing but a small, heavy box meticulously wrapped in thick, reflective gold paper. Before I could even set the beautiful package down on the mahogany welcome table, my mother looked me up and down with absolute disgust and said, "We did not invite you to this. Your sister planned this night for our real circle." My father stepped forward, pushed the gold box off the table, and told me to take my cheap garbage and leave immediately. Then, my arrogant brother-in-law threw a crisp $100 bill at my feet and laughed. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I simply picked up the money, smiled a very cold smile and walked out into the freezing night. When they finally discovered what was actually inside that crushed gold box the next morning, I woke up to exactly 114 missed calls, 72 frantic text messages, and a desperate sobbing voicemail begging for my forgiveness as armed federal agents kicked down their front door. Before I dive into the absolute destruction of my toxic family's fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe right now if you have ever had to stand alone and fight back against toxic family members who severely underestimated your true worth. My name is Valerie, and I am 34 years old. Walking into the spectacular VIP Grand Hall of the Belmont Country Club, I instantly felt the familiar, suffocating weight of my family's harsh judgment heavy in the conditioned air. The massive ballroom was dripping in oversized, ostentatious crystal chandeliers and towering, ridiculous floral arrangements that practically screamed of new money and rooted insecurities. The Belmont was exactly the kind of highly exclusive, pretentious establishment where people desperately pretended to possess immense generational wealth, all while secretly drowning in astronomical credit card debt and taking out secondary mortgages just to afford the monthly membership dues. I was wearing a beautifully tailored, understated vintage black dress. It was elegant, structural, and immaculate, but it did not have a flashy, recognizable designer logo violently plastered across the chest or the buckle. Therefore, to my superficial mother, Yolanda, it was essentially equivalent to a cheap, discarded garbage bag. I had not seen or spoken to my parents in over 2 agonizing years. I had intentionally built a private, highly successful life far away from their toxic, unyielding obsession with social status, elite appearances, and community validation. But I chose to fly back to Boston and walk into this lion's den tonight for one very specific, undeniable reason. I knew something that they did not know. I knew that their entire financial world was collapsing beneath their expensive Italian leather shoes. I knew that the heavy gold box resting securely in my hands held the absolute only legal lifeline that could possibly save them from total, catastrophic ruin. I barely made it past the towering, ridiculous swan ice sculpture near the cloakroom when Yolanda's sharp, predatory eyes locked onto me. She intercepted me with the speed and ferocity of a starving hawk. She was wearing a custom-tailored, sequined gown that I knew for an absolute fact cost significantly more than the entire purchase price of my very first car. Her eyes darted frantically around the beautifully decorated room, terrified, making sure that none of her highly elite, judgmental church friends were watching her interact with the ultimate family disappointment. "What in the world are you doing here, Valerie?" she hissed viciously, keeping her voice low to avoid causing a public scene. Her manicured, acrylic nails dug sharply into my bare arm, trying to physically steer me backward toward the heavy mahogany lobby doors before anyone could see us together. "I explicitly told you over the phone that this was an exclusive event for our real social circle. You are going to embarrass us since walking around tough, looking like some tragic high school guidance counselor." I did not pull my arm away, I did not flinch, and I certainly did not apologize. I simply looked down at her aggressive hand with a look of absolute, clinical detachment until she finally felt uncomfortable enough to let go. "I came here tonight to give you an anniversary gift, Mom," I said calmly, deliberately extending the meticulously wrapped gold box toward her. "It is something that you desperately, urgently need." Before Yolanda could even attempt to swat the box away, My father, Richard, stepped out from behind a towering, ostentatious arrangement of imported white roses. He adjusted his expensive Italian silk tie and immediately glared down at me. His face was twisted into that familiar, suffocating mask of pure disappointment and utter disdain that he had worn every single time he looked at me since my difficult childhood. "We did not invite you to this celebration," Richard said, his deep voice carrying a low, threatening rumble that used to terrify me when I was a vulnerable teenager. "Your sister Monique meticulously planned this entire night to celebrate our family legacy. We do not need you ruining the perfect aesthetic with your cheap, depressing presence." I looked back and forth between the two of them, and I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over my entire body. The old Valerie, the desperate, broken 20-year-old girl, who just wanted her parents to love her, would have instantly started crying. The old Valerie would have pathetically begged for a small seat at the table, just desperate for a tiny scrap of their validation. But the independent, resilient woman standing in front of them right now was not the old Valerie. The woman standing in front of them was the senior director of Federal Asset Recovery for a global forensic intelligence firm. I was a woman who could easily buy this entire elitist country club in pure, liquid cash without even needing to check my primary bank account balance. They just didn't know it yet. I smoothly adjusted my grip on the heavy gold box, feeling the solid, undeniable weight of the legal documents resting inside. "That is extremely funny, Dad," I said, keeping my tone level and devoid of any emotional reaction. "You talk so passionately about preserving aesthetics and family legacy tonight. But I vividly remember the exact brand of the cheap garbage bag you handed me when you heartlessly kicked me out of the house at 18 years old." Richard's jaw tightened dangerously, but I didn't stop talking. I stepped just an inch closer, making sure my voice was crystal clear. "It was a hefty bag, drawstring closure, very sturdy and highly practical for a terrified young girl that you threw directly out onto the freezing street in the middle of a brutal winter." I continued, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. "And you did it, just because I refused to surrender my two pathetic minimum wage paychecks to fund a lavish down payment for Monique's brand new, luxury car." Yolanda scoffed loudly, waving her diamond-ringed hand dismissively in the air, as if she were swatting away an annoying, insignificant fly. "Oh, please, Valerie, do not start with this exhausting victim narrative," Yolanda sneered, rolling her eyes dramatically. "You are still holding on to that ancient, irrelevant history. You always were so unbelievably dramatic and pathologically jealous of your younger sister. Monique is a massive success. She married a brilliant, highly sought-after Wall Street financial expert who actually provides for her. Look at you now. You are 34 years old, working some depressing back-office bank job, and showing up here uninvited to beg for pathetic scraps from our table. You really should leave, Valerie," my father added. He took a heavy, deliberate step closer to me, trying to use his significant physical height to intimidate me. Exactly just like he always successfully did when I was a frightened teenager. "You have always been the dark, toxic cloud hanging over this family. We are trying to actually enjoy a massive milestone tonight. Do not make me instantly call the country club security and have you physically escorted out of here like a common trespasser." "Security?" I asked, slightly tilting my head with genuine chilling amusement. "You want to violently call security on your own biological daughter? Simply because she brought you an anniversary gift? It is probably just a cheap discounted candle or a tacky plastic picture frame," Yolanda sneered, her face contorting with absolute disgust. "We do not want your discount store garbage in this building." Before I could even respond to her ridiculous assumption, Yolanda reached out and forcefully slapped my hand. The heavy gold box violently slipped from my fingers and hit the highly polished marble floor with a loud, heavy thud. The sudden, violent sound echoed just loudly enough across the massive room to make a few curious heads turn directly in our direction. My father looked unbothered by my mother's sudden physical aggression. Instead, he simply kicked the fallen box lightly with his expensive Italian leather shoe. casually pushing it toward the grand exit doors, as if it were a piece of literal garbage. Take your pathetic trash and go immediately back to whatever tiny, miserable apartment you flew in from, Richard commanded, immediately turning his back on me to dismiss my entire existence. I stood there in complete silence for a very long moment. I let the absolute silence stretch between us. I let their pure, unfiltered disrespect settle into my bones, cementing the devastating decision I had made exactly 3 months ago when this investigation first began. I slowly, elegantly bent down and picked up the heavy gold box from the marble floor. I carefully brushed a tiny speck of invisible dust off the shiny, reflective paper. Then I smiled. It was not a warm, friendly smile. It was the terrifying, utterly cold smile of an apex predator, watching its oblivious prey willingly walk directly into a steel cage and lock the door firmly from the inside. Are you sure you do not want this? I asked them one final, highly deliberate time. Because I want to be extremely clear with you right now. If I walk out those heavy doors with this exact box tonight, your entire precious legacy is over. There will be no coming back from what inevitably happens tomorrow morning. Yolanda rolled her made-up eyes dramatically and immediately turned away to enthusiastically greet a wealthy church elder, instantaneously pasting a fake, intensely glowing smile onto her face as if I ceased to exist. Richard did not even bother to look back at me. He just waved his large hand over his shoulder in a dismissive, shooing motion. I took a very deep, satisfying breath. The heavy smell of expensive, overpowering perfume and cheap morals filled my lungs. I nodded quietly to myself. The singular offer of absolute salvation was officially off the table forever. Just as I turned around and began walking toward the heavy glass doors of the club lobby, a sharp, familiar voice echoed across the expansive, echoing marble floor. It was Monique. She was walking in from the VIP valet area, clinging tightly to the arm of her smug husband, Connor. Monique was the absolute picture of spoiled, unearned perfection. She was wearing a breathtaking, highly custom silk designer gown that I knew for an absolute, undeniable fact my parents had secretly taken out a highly dangerous secondary mortgage just to pay for. Her hair was styled, falling in elegant, cascading waves over her shoulders, and she was carrying a limited edition designer clutch that easily cost significantly more than most people's entire annual rent. She was the highly prized golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the favored daughter who was constantly paraded around our elite community as the ultimate, shining success story. Everything about her entire demeanor screamed pure, unadulterated entitlement. Beside her stood Connor. He was wearing a highly custom-tailored suit with his hair slicked back, carrying a smug, highly punchable expression that never seemed to leave his face. Connor loved to play the highly exaggerated part of the wealthy, connected Wall Street financial expert. From his overly tailored suit to the blindingly flashy, heavy watch resting on his wrist, everything about him was a carefully constructed, highly fraudulent illusion. My superficial parents practically worshipped the solid ground he walked on, simply because he represented the highly elite status they so desperately, pathetically craved to validate their own hollow existence. They bragged endlessly to their elite friends at the country club and the church congregation that their youngest daughter had successfully married a financial genius. But I definitively knew the absolute terrifying truth. Connor was an absolute fraud running a massive, highly illegal, multi-million-dollar offshore Ponzi scheme. Even worse, he had secretly forged my father's signature to use my parents' sprawling colonial estate as massive collateral for a dangerous $14 million underground loan from a ruthless Chicago crime syndicate. Valerie, what in the absolute world are you doing here? Monique snapped, her panicked eyes darting frantically around the elegant, highly populated lobby to see if any of her wealthy socialite friends were watching us. She let go of Connor's arm and marched directly up to me, her expensive designer heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. You are not invited to this. This is an exclusive anniversary party for Mom and Dad. We do not need you showing up in your plain, depressing clothes, making us look like some pathetic charity case in front of the highly elite people who actually matter. I stopped walking and looked quietly at my highly emotional younger sister. I felt nothing for her, no anger, no sadness, just a profound, overwhelming sense of clinical, utterly cold pity. I brought a gift for our parents, Monique, I said, simply shifting the heavy, slightly dented gold-wrapped box in my calm hands. But I was just leaving anyway, so you do not have to worry about your carefully curated, fake aesthetic being ruined by my depressing presence. Connor let out a massive, loud, highly arrogant laugh that bounced off the high, vaulted ceilings. He immediately stepped forward, sliding his hands casually into the pockets of his expensive, custom-tailored suit. "Come on, Valerie," Connor said with an condescending, insulting smirk that instantly made my skin crawl. "We all know exactly why you really showed up here tonight. You probably heard about the massive executive promotion I lied to everyone about getting, and you desperately figured you could just easily squeeze your rich, highly successful family for a pathetic cash handout. Is the rent finally due on whatever tiny, depressing studio apartment you are currently living in right now?" I stared at him, letting the cold silence stretch between us. The sheer, unadulterated, absolute audacity of this pathetic man was almost impressive. He was drowning in a catastrophic $14 million federal debt with violent, highly dangerous, offshore creditors breathing down his pathetic neck, and yet he still had the misplaced energy to confidently stand in an elite country club lobby and openly mock me. "I do not need your fake money, Connor," I replied, intentionally keeping my voice steady, beautifully calm and unnervingly quiet. "You should honestly probably strongly hold on to every single pathetic penny you currently have. You are going to need it very, very soon." Connor narrowed his arrogant eyes, clearly not liking the intense, calm authority resonating in my firm tone. He reached into his highly tailored suit jacket, sharply pulled out a sleek, expensive designer leather wallet, and dramatically extracted a crisp, highly visible $100 bill. He did not hand it to me. With a massive, highly theatrical sigh, he intentionally dropped the cash directly onto the highly polished marble floor, right at my absolute feet. "Do yourself a massive favor, and quickly take a cab back to the disgusting slums, Valerie," he sneered, his voice dripping with pure poison. "Go buy yourself a decent, warm, hot meal, and stop constantly bothering the successful people who actually made something impressive out of their successful lives." Monique giggled loudly, covering her glossed mouth with her manicured hand, acting exactly as if Connor had just done something charming, protective, and witty. "Just take the cash and go," she said loudly, rolling her made-up eyes at me. "You are embarrassing yourself as usual." They all expected me to instantly break down. They expected me to instantly yell, cry, or desperately beg for their conditional love and absolute approval. Exactly just like I pathetically used to do when I was a desperate teenager seeking pure validation. But I did not shed a single pathetic tear. Instead, I beautifully, slowly crouched down, maintaining perfect, unblinking eye contact with Connor, as I elegantly, effortlessly picked up the crisp $100 bill he had just violently thrown at me. I beautifully stood up gracefully, stepped into his guarded personal space, and very gently, elegantly tucked the crisp bill directly into the heavy breast pocket of his expensive custom suit jacket, beautifully smoothing the expensive silk lapel with two calm fingers. "Use this cash to buy yourself a competent federal defense attorney, Connor," I whispered softly, making sure that only he could hear the terrifying promise of legal ruin vibrating in my voice. Then I walked over to the slightly crushed gold box resting on the floor. I picked it up, dusting off the shiny reflective paper one last time with measured precision. I walked toward a massive decorative mahogany console table situated directly near the grand entrance doors. I carefully set the gold box down, placing it in the center of the table under a bright illuminating spotlight. I turned around and faced my toxic family one final time. My face held a chilling, calculated, cold smile. I looked directly deep into my father's eyes, then shifted my calm gaze to my panicked mother, then quickly to the highly entitled Monique, and finally to the arrogant Connor, whose smug expression had suddenly faltered just a microscopic, revealing fraction of an inch. I want you all to remember this exact, specific moment for the rest of your lives, I said, my calm voice carrying clearly across the quiet, luxurious elite lobby. I want you to remember that I came here specifically tonight to generously give you a clean way out. But after tonight, nothing can ever be legally undone. I did not wait for their shocked response. I immediately turned on my heel, forcefully pushed open the heavy glass double doors, and walked directly out into the freezing night air, leaving them behind with their massive arrogance, their fake, mortgaged wealth, and a crushed gold box that currently held the absolute only legal key to stopping their imminent, massive destruction. The respectful valet brought my sleek car around to the illuminated front entrance of the elite club. It was a custom, stealthy matte black Porsche Panamera. The valet attendant respectfully handed me the heavy keys with a reverent nod. My toxic family still thought I drove the same beaten-up, pathetic Honda Civic I bought when I was in a cheap, local college because I never bothered to correct their flawed assumptions. They preferred me desperately poor. It made their manufactured, fake success somehow taste sweeter. I slid into the soft, luxurious custom leather driver's seat and firmly pushed the glowing metallic ignition button. The powerful engine roared to life with a deep, low, terrifying hum that vibrated through my chest. I merged directly onto the quiet midnight highway, heading directly back toward the towering city. The digital dashboard screen suddenly lit up with an incoming phone call. The caller ID brightly read, Aunt Brenda. I let it ring directly straight to my voicemail. Aunt Brenda was my narcissistic mother's older sister, and the ultimate enabler of my family's unbearable, toxic behavior. She was the massive family gossip, the flawed woman who appointed herself the guardian of our fake elite social standing. Less than a minute later, my luxury car's integrated Bluetooth system chimed loudly, alerting me to a new urgent audio message. I tapped the glowing screen to play it exactly as the dark trees blurred past my thick window. Valerie, I cannot believe what I just heard from your extremely distraught mother. Brenda's shrill voice filled the quiet cabin of my expensive car. Her tone was dripping with that familiar, condescending, fake disappointment. Yolanda told me you showed up to their beautiful elite 40th anniversary party uninvited, looking exactly like a homeless person and trying to start massive drama. When are you going to finally grow up and stop being so horribly jealous of your successful younger sister? Monique married a massive Wall Street genius. Connor is a massive provider. He is taking care of your aging parents, making sure they live the elite lifestyle they deserve. You are 34 years old, Valerie. It is time to stop acting like a bitter child just because you work a pathetic dead-end job and cannot afford to buy them nice, expensive things. The voicemail ended with a sharp, angry click. I kept my eyes on the dark road, watching the reflective lane markers speed by in a hypnotic rhythm. The premium, hand-stitched leather steering wheel felt cool and firm beneath my steady hands. A massive Wall Street genius, that was the flawed, utterly pathetic delusion my toxic family clung to like a life raft. Connor had convinced them all that his high-risk trading strategy, his supposed proprietary algorithmic trading bot, was going to magically catapult them into the highest echelons of generational wealth. I tapped the steering wheel and instructed the car's integrated system to call Aunt Brenda directly back. She answered on the second ring, audibly breathing, ready to yell at me some more. I am glad you called me back, Valerie, she snapped immediately. You need to drive back to that country club right now and apologize to your brother-in-law. He is way too important a man to be dealing with your petty tantrums. I did not raise my calm voice. I spoke with a quiet, chilling precision that naturally made people physically lean in and listen. Aunt Brenda, I asked smoothly, when was the last time you actually talked to my father directly about his retirement accounts? Or better yet, when was the last time you looked at your own investment portfolio that Connor so generously offered to manage for you? There was a brief, tense pause on the line. What are you talking about? Brenda demanded, her voice faltering just a microscopic fraction. Richard's retirement is fine, and my portfolio is thriving. Connor is managing our entire family's assets. He is tripling our returns. Your father bragged about it at our elite church just last Sunday. He showed Pastor Davis the quarterly statements, printed on Connor's official corporate letterhead. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air conditioning flow over me. Connor is not managing a portfolio, Brenda, I said plainly. He is running a massive, illegal $14 million federal Ponzi scheme. And your highly praised brother-in-law is broke. He drained every single penny from my parents' retirement funds exactly 6 months ago to pay off angry offshore investors who realized his tech startup was a fake shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He didn't stop there. He liquidated the church's building fund, the money Pastor Davis entrusted to him, to cover his massive, highly leveraged margin calls. That is a disgusting lie, Brenda shouted, the panic rapidly rising in her tight throat. You are just saying that because you hate him. Connor just bought your parents that massive new luxury yacht. We spent last weekend sailing it around the harbor. Connor bought that fake luxury yacht using a highly dangerous, high-interest federal title loan, secretly secured against my oblivious parents' massive colonial house. I replied, cutting through her denial exactly like a sharp scalpel. He forged my father's signature directly on the federal deed transfer. My toxic parents are broke. Brenda, they have exactly less than $200 left in their primary checking account. They are just too blinded by the fake country club aesthetic to ever look at their actual bank statements. They let a fake white con artist drain their entire life savings because he wore a nice suit and made them feel superior to everyone else. I could hear Aunt Brenda breathing through the luxury car speakers. She was silent because, deep down, she knew I was right. She had always noticed the obvious cracks in Connor's highly aggressive story, the constantly changing phone numbers, the sudden mysterious trips, the aggressive defensiveness whenever someone asked for a simple tax form, but exactly like the rest of them, she chose the comfortable lie over the ugly truth. Listen to me carefully, Aunt Brenda, I said smoothly, steering my car directly into the fast lane. Tomorrow morning, the entire illusion is going to shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. The people Connor owes his $14 million to are not the polite kind of people who send nice legal emails. They are the kind of highly dangerous offshore syndicate operators who seize massive physical assets. I am calling you right now specifically to give you exactly one piece of advice. When my fake mother calls you crying her eyes out tomorrow morning, begging you for a massive financial loan, do not give her a single dime. Because Connor will take that too. You are crazy. Brenda stammered, her voice shaking with genuine, mounting terror now. You are making this all up because you want to destroy this family. This toxic family destroyed itself years ago, Brenda, I said calmly. I just brought the shovel to finally bury it. I ended the phone call before she could respond. The silence inside the luxury car was beautifully pristine. I watched the sprawling city lights approaching in the distance, reflecting beautifully off the sleek black hood of my Porsche. My toxic parents had spent their entire lives treating me like an embarrassment, all while blindly handing their financial security over to a smiling thief. They valued proximity to fake wealth over actual substantive character. They wanted the white picket fence, the expensive country club memberships, and the envy of their superficial peers far more than they ever wanted to protect their own biological daughter. And tomorrow morning, they were going to wake up with nothing. I pressed down on the gas pedal. The powerful engine hummed louder, smoothly carrying me away from the massive physical wreckage they were about to face. I had genuinely given them their one chance at redemption. The slightly dented gold box sitting on that mahogany table was a legal miracle that would have wiped Connor's underground debt clean. As the senior director of federal asset recovery, I had spent the last 3 months orchestrating the hostile acquisition of the toxic debt that Connor's ruthless creditors held, specifically to lay this exact trap. If they had just opened the gold box, they would have seen the notarized settlement documents. If they had just treated me like a human being for 5 short minutes, they would have kept their beautiful, sprawling house. But they chose arrogance, they chose pride over humility, and now the digital clock was rapidly ticking down to midnight. I pulled my car securely into the massive underground parking garage of my luxury residential building. The highly trained security guard nodded respectfully as he immediately opened the private elevator reserved specifically for the elite penthouse residents. My highly delusional family still thought I lived in a cramped, dangerous studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, because that was the comfortable narrative that made them feel inherently superior. The absolute truth was that I lived in a breathtaking $8 million penthouse overlooking the entire glittering city skyline. The heavy elevator doors opened directly into my massive, beautifully curated foyer. The quiet, understated luxury of my modern home was a stark, intentional contrast to the loud, desperate display of new money I had just walked away from at the country club. I walked across the imported Brazilian hardwood floors, dropping my heavy car keys on the sleek marble kitchen island. I poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water and walked slowly over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering, sprawling city below. My personal phone buzzed on the counter, the bright screen lit up with an urgent notification from Instagram. Monique had just gone live. I picked up the phone and tapped the screen, watching her contoured face appear in high definition. She was sitting comfortably in the plush custom leather back seat of the leased Mercedes-Benz that Connor proudly drove. The interior luxury lighting was adjusted to highlight the highly convincing, fake tears welling up in her eyes. She was holding the phone close to her face using a subtle, highly effective beauty filter that made her look fragile and emotionally exhausted. "I cannot believe I even have to make this difficult video," she began, her voice trembling with practiced, highly manipulative vulnerability. "Tonight was supposed to be a beautiful, highly exclusive celebration for my amazing parents' 40-year anniversary. We were at the prestigious Belmont Country Club, surrounded by our wonderful, highly successful friends and our entire elite church family. But my troubled older sister, Valerie, decided to show up uninvited and ruin everything." I took a slow, methodical sip of my sparkling water, watching the live viewer count climb rapidly into the hundreds. Monique knew exactly how to play the innocent victim. She was an absolute master at manipulating the public narrative to feed her own insatiable ego. "Valerie has always struggled," Monique continued, gently wiping a dry, invisible tear from her cheek. "She vehemently refuses to work hard, and she has always been pathologically jealous of my highly successful husband, Connor, and the beautiful life we have built. Tonight, she crashed the exclusive party, looking disheveled, just to desperately beg my parents for money. Connor even generously offered her $100 in cash out of his own pocket to help her out. But she violently threw it in his face and caused a massive scene. It breaks my absolute heart to see her so lost and bitter." I calmly watched the live comments start to flood in. Monique had deliberately, highly strategically tagged several elite members of our prominent church congregation, including Pastor Davis and Sister Jenkins, ensuring that the massive social damage would spread through our entire elite community. The church circle was the most important, highly critical audience to my superficial parents. It was the specific place where they derived all their massive social power and desperate validation. I stood alone in my massive quiet living room, calmly watching the digital lynch mob gather on the glowing screen. A few years ago, this level of coordinated public humiliation would have destroyed me. I would have frantically typed out massive paragraphs, desperately trying to defend myself to people who hated me. I would have posted screenshots of my actual bank accounts or desperately tried to logically explain my side of the complicated story. I would have let their carefully constructed lies dictate my entire emotional state. But tonight I felt nothing but a cold, clinical amusement. They were performing a pathetic, highly scripted play on a rapidly sinking luxury ship. Monique kept talking, staring mournfully into the phone camera. "We are just going to focus on pure love tonight," she said bravely. "We are going to pray for Valerie and hope she eventually finds peace. We are not going to let her toxic, negative energy ruin our beautiful family legacy." She paused, waiting for more highly sympathetic comments to rapidly roll in. The live viewer count was well over 300 now. The elite circles of our entire community were eating out of her manicured hand. I set my water glass carefully down on the marble counter. I calmly opened the keyboard on my phone. I did not need to desperately defend myself to arrogant people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I only needed to send exactly one message to the highly specific two people who actually knew they were living a massive lie. I quickly typed out one single devastating comment. "Enjoy the rest of your beautiful night, Monique. I highly recommend Connor wipes his encrypted hard drives." I calmly hit send. I watched my brief comment appear at the very bottom of the rapidly scrolling chat. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Monique was still talking about forgiveness and divine grace. Then, her eyes darted down to read the new comment appearing on her screen. The physical change in her entire demeanor was instantaneous and terrifying to watch. The fake, vulnerable smile vanished from her face, her contoured face instantly drained of all color. The expensive phone in her hand physically shook. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her mouth hung open slightly as she stared at the words on the screen in pure horror. "Babe, what is it?" Connor asked loudly from the front driver's seat of the luxury car. He sounded annoyed. "Are you still on that stupid live stream?" Monique did not answer him. She just kept staring at my comment, her eyes wide with sudden, genuine, unadulterated panic. The live viewers in the chat immediately started asking frantic questions. They noticed the massive, dramatic shift. They started asking what the comment meant and who exactly Valerie was talking about. Suddenly, the screen went black. The live stream ended abruptly. Monique had massively panicked and shut down the entire broadcast. I locked my phone and casually tossed it onto the soft cushions of my expensive designer sofa. I let out a long, highly satisfied, slow exhale, the quiet silence of my luxury penthouse wrapped around me like a highly protective blanket. Down in the busy streets below, people were going about their busy lives, unaware of the massive financial earthquake that was about to violently strike my toxic family. Monique and Connor were probably sitting right now in that parked luxury car, in the country club parking lot, screaming at each other. Connor was probably finally realizing that his carefully constructed, highly fraudulent house of cards was finally collapsing. He had spent the last 6 months defrauding investors, stealing the massive retirement money of my oblivious parents, and forging federal property deeds, all while playing the arrogant hero. And now he knew that I knew. I walked over to the smart panel on my wall and smoothly dimmed the bright lights in the massive living room. The digital clock on the stove glowed softly in the dark, quiet kitchen. It was exactly 10:30 at night. In exactly 90 minutes, the crushed gold box I had left sitting on the mahogany table at the country club would officially expire. The $14 million federal debt that my private equity firm had quietly purchased from the highly dangerous creditors Connor had would automatically default. And when it defaulted, the ruthless legal mechanisms would trigger automatically. I did not feel guilty. My parents chose their fake aesthetic over their own biological daughter. They chose a white con artist over their own flesh and blood. They wanted a legacy built on lies, and tomorrow morning, they were going to get exactly what they paid for. I turned away from the window and headed directly toward my master bedroom to get a good night's sleep. The morning was going to be busy. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the plush mattress. My secure laptop was open on the nightstand, glowing softly in the dark. On the screen was a live digital clock counting down the final remaining minutes to midnight. I stared at the numbers, feeling a profound, satisfying sense of closure. 10 miles away, the gold-wrapped box was probably sitting exactly where I left it, on the mahogany table in the country club lobby. Or maybe an overworked janitor had already swept it into a massive trash bin. My parents had treated it exactly like garbage, but they had no idea they had literally thrown away their only chance at absolute survival. When those dangerous lenders came to collect, Connor panicked. He did the absolute unthinkable. He physically stole the original federal deed to my parents' sprawling colonial estate. He forged my father's exact signature and used the entire family home as massive collateral for a $14 million underground loan. My parents were oblivious. They were too busy bragging about Connor's imaginary promotions at our elite church to ever notice their entire legacy was signed away to ruthless criminals. But those highly aggressive criminals made one massive mistake. They packaged Connor's toxic debt along with several other highly toxic assets and sold it to a larger financial institution. 2 weeks ago, my private equity firm quietly acquired that exact massive portfolio. The moment my elite compliance team flagged Connor's name and the forged deed, I knew the universe had finally handed me the ultimate legal weapon. I owned Connor's massive debt. I legally owned my parents' sprawling house. The legal documents inside that crushed gold box were a complete and total amnesty agreement. I had drafted them myself with my elite lead attorney. If my arrogant parents had simply opened the box, they would have found a highly binding contract fully releasing the heavy lien on their house and wiping Connor's massive debt to zero. All they had to do was sign on the dotted line. It was a golden ticket, a literal miracle wrapped beautifully in gold paper. I had offered them absolute salvation on a silver platter just to see if they could muster a single ounce of basic human decency toward me. They could not. They chose to humiliate me instead, while the digital clock ticked down. My toxic parents were probably back at their sprawling, highly mortgaged estate, unaware that the solid ground beneath them was about to give way. I imagined Yolanda casually unzipping her expensive sequined gown and pouring another massive glass of highly expensive champagne, laughing with Richard about how they had successfully driven me away from their perfect, highly elite anniversary party. Meanwhile, Connor was highly likely pacing the expensive hardwood floor of his massive leased mansion, hyperventilating. He knew the absolute legal deadline for his massive loan was precisely tonight. He knew the dangerous lenders he originally borrowed from did not send polite legal collection letters. He probably thought highly violent Luncan for coming for him. He had no idea his massive $14 million debt had been fully legally purchased by the quiet sister-in-law he had just thrown a crisp $100 bill at. He had no idea I was the only one holding the massive legal leash. The digital clock on my laptop flipped silently to 11:58. 2 minutes left. My phone lay silent beside it. There were no frantic calls apologizing for their highly toxic behavior at the elite country club. There were no text messages asking me to come back and join the family. They had made their absolute choice. They had doubled down on their arrogance and their toxic pride. The glowing numbers smoothly shifted to 11:59. I reached out and gently rested my hand on the laptop keyboard. The settlement documents in the crushed gold box had a very specific, highly aggressive legal clause written directly into the fine print. The amnesty offer was valid only until precisely midnight on the exact date of their 40th anniversary. The exact moment the clock struck 12, the offer would be permanently, legally revoked. The massive $14 million debt would default immediately, and my elite legal team had already pre-filed the necessary federal paperwork to execute a hostile foreclosure and alert federal authorities to Connor's massive financial fraud the exact, precise second the default legally occurred. I calmly watched the seconds tick down on the bright screen. The digital clock officially struck 12. Midnight. I let out a slow, steady breath. The massive legal trap officially snapped shut. Instantly, a large green checkmark appeared on my laptop screen. My firm's highly advanced automated legal software recognized the expired deadline. A massive flurry of encrypted emails were automatically dispatched. Massive federal warrants were electronically triggered. Hostile foreclosure notices were officially logged directly into the county legal database. The local sheriff's department immediately received a massive priority federal fraud alert with undeniable, highly detailed documentary evidence attached, clearly showing exactly how Connor had forged the real estate documents. It was all in aggressive motion now, and no amount of fake crying, or desperate praying, or elite name-dropping could ever legally stop it. The federal system was ruthless, and it did not care about their highly expensive country club memberships. I calmly closed the laptop screen, gracefully plunging the entire bedroom into complete, perfect darkness. The highly elite aesthetic they had worshipped for decades was officially, legally dead. The fake legacy they cared so much about was erased. I pulled the heavy down comforter comfortably over my shoulders and gently closed my eyes. For the first time in my entire adult life, I slept through the quiet night, knowing that tomorrow morning, the universe was finally going to hand them the exact massive bill they had been running from for years. I woke up the next morning, right at exactly 8 o'clock. Warm sunlight was streaming beautifully through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my bedroom, beautifully illuminating the tiny dust motes dancing peacefully in the air. I stretched my arms, feeling rested and utterly at peace. The air in my massive pence was cool and quiet, a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was unfolding across town. Exactly 114 missed calls. There were also exactly 72 unread text messages. Most of the highly desperate missed calls were specifically from my toxic mother Yolanda, but there were quite a few from my father, Richard, and even a handful from the usually highly arrogant Monique. I did not feel any rush to desperately call them back. The audio progression of those frantic messages was an absolute masterclass in the complete, massive collapse of pure human arrogance. The very first urgent message was recorded at 6:12 in the early morning. It was Yolanda. Her voice was sharp and filled with that familiar entitled anger that she had wielded exactly like a massive weapon my entire life. "Valerie, wake up and call me back right this instant," she demanded. "Some absolute, arrogant idiots from the federal bank are banging on our front door, making a massive scene. They are claiming there is a massive issue with the federal deed to the house. This is unacceptable and embarrassing. I need you to wire us $50,000 right now to clear up whatever stupid clerical error this is before the elite neighbors wake up and see these aggressive people on our lawn. Call me the exact second you hear this. You owe us that massive amount after the stupid stunt you pulled last night." The message ended with a highly angry, sharp click. I took another slow, highly circular pour of hot water over the coffee grounds, watching the beautiful dark liquid drip steadily into the glass carafe below. They still thought massive money was a magic wand that could wave away their massive criminal problems. They still thought I owed them my absolute compliance. The next relevant voicemail came in exactly at 6:45. This time it was my arrogant father, Richard. His deep voice was lower, tense, and vibrating with poorly concealed, massive panic. "Valerie, answer your phone," he barked. "This is not a joke. These massive men are holding a hostile foreclosure notice with my exact signature on it. But I never signed anything. They are saying Connor used the house as massive collateral for a $14 million offshore loan. That is impossible. Connor is a Wall Street expert. I have been trying to call Connor for the last half hour, and his phone is going straight to empty voicemail. I need you to use your federal connections at the bank to stop this right now. Do not ignore me, Valerie. I am your father, and I am telling you to fix this." I calmly poured the beautifully finished coffee into my favorite ceramic mug. I wrapped both hands comfortably around the warm clay and took a slow, highly satisfying sip. The deep flavor was complex, much exactly like the massive situation playing out exactly 10 miles away. Richard was finally realizing that the golden boy he worshipped had sold him out to save his own skin. The third voicemail played. It was time-stamped at 7:20 in the morning. Yolanda's voice had changed drastically. The commanding, arrogant tone was gone. In its place was the shrill, shaky sound of sheer, unadulterated panic. "Valerie, please," she practically begged, her breath catching in her tight throat. "Please pick up the phone. The federal police are here. There are two black tactical SUVs parked right in our driveway. They are telling us we have to pack a single bag and vacate the premises immediately. They said the house belongs to a firm called Vipex Holdings. They are talking about massive offshore fraud, Valerie. They are saying Connor committed federal wire fraud and embezzled $14 million. Monique is screaming uncontrollably in the driveway, and Connor is nowhere to be found. Please, Valerie, you work in finance. You have to know how to stop this. They are treating us like common criminals. I walked slowly over to the living room window and looked out over the sprawling city. The morning sun was fully up now, beautifully painting the towering skyscrapers in brilliant shades of gold and silver. Yolanda's desperate tears meant nothing to me. She was not crying because she felt genuine remorse for how horribly she had treated me. She was crying because the elite church friends she cared so much about were probably peering out of their expensive windows, watching her get evicted in broad daylight. She was grieving her social status, not her alienated family. The final voicemail I listened to was from just a few minutes before 8 o'clock. Yolanda was sobbing hysterically. The background noise was chaotic. I could hear heavy men shouting tactical instructions and the distinct sound of heavy wooden doors being slammed shut. "Valerie, please," she wailed. "They are literally changing the locks on the front door. We are standing on the sidewalk in our pajamas. Richard is holding his chest. He is having a massive panic attack. We have nowhere to go, please, sweetie. I know we said some harsh things last night, but we are your family. You have to help us, please call me back. I am begging you." The message beeped sharply and the phone went silent. I took another long sip of my coffee. Sweetie, that was a brand new word. She had not called me sweetie since I was a small child. It is genuinely amazing how quickly toxic people mysteriously discover their affection for you, exactly when they desperately need something from you. They had spent my entire life violently pushing me down the steep stairs of their impossible expectations. And now they were surprised that I was not patiently standing at the bottom, waiting to gently catch them. I set my empty coffee mug down on the smooth marble counter. The morning sun was fully illuminating my luxury penthouse, but my attention was focused on the digital world. I walked over to my modern home office and picked up my silver iPad from the sleek wooden desk. I swiped the high-definition screen to unlock it and tapped on a small blue icon in the corner of the display. It was a highly encrypted security camera application. The application loaded smoothly, and the high-definition live feeds populated my screen. I split the large display into 4 distinct camera angles: the front porch, the wide driveway, the main grand foyer, and the backyard patio. I sat down in my plush ergonomic office chair and watched the chaos unfold exactly like it was a high-budget cinema production. On the front porch feed, the situation was escalating rapidly. The grand mahogany doors of my parents' estate were securely locked, but the people standing outside were not going to wait much longer. There were 4 armed federal police officers wearing dark tactical vests with yellow FBI lettering. Their faces were stern and devoid of any sympathy. Standing right behind them were 3 intimidating men in sharp gray suits. These were the highly specialized asset recovery agents sent directly by my private equity firm to execute the hostile foreclosure. One of the sharp-suited agents was holding a thick metal clipboard, tapping a heavy pen against it with rhythmic impatience. I watched as the largest federal officer raised his heavy fist and pounded violently on the mahogany door. The deep, thudding sound picked up by the sensitive camera microphone was loud, making my iPad speakers visibly vibrate. "Open the door, Richard," the federal officer shouted, his deep voice echoing menacingly across the pristine, manicured lawn. "We have a federal search warrant and a court-ordered eviction notice. If you do not open this door in the next 60 seconds, we are legally authorized to physically breach the entrance." I casually switched my attention to the camera feed showing the wide driveway. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal police cruisers were reflecting brightly off the pristine white columns of the massive house. But what really caught my eye was the frantic activity on the street directly behind the cruisers. The highly elite neighborhood was rapidly waking up. These were the judgmental people Yolanda had spent her entire superficial life trying desperately to impress. The wealthy doctors, the powerful corporate lawyers, the influential church elders. I could clearly see Mrs. Carmichael from the country club walking her purebred poodle. She had stopped frozen on the pristine sidewalk, staring open-mouthed at the massive spectacle. Mr. Henderson, the prominent bank executive next door, was standing on his porch, wearing a silk robe, holding his morning newspaper, and openly pointing at my parents' house. The social ruin was absolute. The carefully crafted, arrogant illusion of generational wealth was burning to the ground in broad daylight, and everyone in their prestigious circle had a front-row seat. I dragged my finger smoothly across the iPad screen to enlarge the camera from the inside main foyer. The contrast between the confident armed men standing outside and the pathetic, chaotic scene inside was striking. My mother, Yolanda, was pacing frantically back and forth across the expensive Persian rug. She was wearing her lavish silk pajamas, but her usually perfect hair was a messy, tangled bird's nest. She kept grabbing her own face and pulling at her hair, a stark, dramatic departure from the poised, arrogant woman who had swatted my gift away the night before. Richard was standing near the sweeping, dramatic staircase, his face a highly dangerous shade of deep purple. He was clutching his chest with one trembling hand and holding his cell phone with the other. He was screaming into the phone, but I could clearly tell he was only getting empty voicemail. He was desperately trying to call Connor, the golden boy, the beloved Wall Street genius, who had secretly used this very house as collateral for an underground syndicate loan. Richard looked small and terrified. The imposing family patriarch, who loved to use his physical height to intimidate me, was suddenly reduced to a weak, panicking old man. I turned the volume up on the iPad. I wanted to hear every single word of their downfall. "This cannot be happening," Yolanda wailed, her voice echoing shrilly in the grand foyer. "Richard, you have to call the mayor. Call Judge Patterson. Tell them this is a massive misunderstanding. We are respectable people. They cannot treat us like criminals." "Judge Patterson is not picking up his phone," Richard yelled back, a heavy, crushing note of pure despair violently cracking his voice. "Nobody is picking up their phones, Yolanda. Connor has vanished. His phone is disconnected. I do not understand what is happening." Boom, boom, boom. The federal police officer slammed his heavy fist against the mahogany door again. The explosive sound made both of my parents jump out of their skin. Yolanda let out a shrill scream and backed rapidly away from the grand entrance, blindly stumbling over an expensive antique vase. "We are breaching the door in 10 seconds. The officer warned sharply from outside. "Stand back." I watched with cold, clinical satisfaction as Richard finally realized he had no other options left. His wealth was fake, his high-level connections were utterly useless against a federal fraud warrant. His favorite son-in-law was a fleeing criminal who had stolen everything from them. He slowly walked toward the front door, his wide shoulders slumped in total, crushing defeat. His hands were shaking violently as he reached out to slowly unlock the heavy deadbolt. I leaned back comfortably in my chair and crossed my legs. The legal trap I had meticulously set was flawless. They had spent decades building a fortress of lies and deep entitlement. They had rejected my salvation because it did not come wrapped in the specific aesthetic they demanded. And now, they were literally opening the door to their own destruction. The live feed was the best television I had watched in years. As Richard turned the heavy brass lock, I toggled my screen to show all 4 camera feeds at once. The heavy mahogany door swung inward, revealing my broken, terrified father to the stern federal police officers and the ruthless asset recovery agents. Yolanda fell dramatically to her knees in the background, weeping loudly. The officers immediately stepped into the grand foyer, taking total physical control of the property. My childhood home, the towering fortress of impossible expectations I could never meet, was officially no longer theirs. I watched the sharp-suited agents physically hand Richard the massive foreclosure documents. He stared blindly at the front page, his eyes tracking over the Vapex Holdings logo. The terrifying realization washed over his pale face. The company executing the hostile foreclosure, the firm that now owned his massive debt, was the exact same company I had calmly told them I worked for. I picked up my silver iPad, locked the screen, and placed it back on my desk. I did not need to watch the rest of the physical eviction. I already knew exactly how the predictable script would play out. They would be forced out onto the pristine street with nothing but a single suitcase. Connor would eventually be hunted down and arrested by federal authorities for running a massive $14 million wire fraud and offshore embezzlement ring. Monique, the pristine golden child, would be utterly stripped of her fake, curated identity, publicly exposed to the very elite church congregation she had spent years desperately manipulating. I walked smoothly out of my modern home office, grabbed my heavy car keys off the marble kitchen island, and headed directly for the private elevator. I wasn't going to drive to the house to gloat. Gloating was for insecure people who needed external validation. I didn't need their tears, and I certainly didn't want their forced apologies. I was simply going to my beautiful office to review the final asset liquidation documents, firmly close the Connor file, and permanently move on with my successful life. My parents had spent my entire life teaching me that I was a cheap, disposable disappointment because I didn't fit into their shallow, superficial narrative. They taught me that my quiet, introverted nature was a massive weakness. But they were catastrophically wrong. My silence wasn't a weakness. It was a strategic, highly powerful advantage. While they were busy performing their fake wealth for an audience that secretly despised them, I was quietly, methodically building an unstoppable, massive empire in the shadows. When you are the quiet scapegoat in a toxic family, they will always fundamentally underestimate your true capability. They will push you, mock you, and try to break your spirit to maintain their fragile control. But the most powerful thing you can possibly do is simply stop arguing. Stop desperately begging for a seat at their toxic table. Walk away, build your own beautiful table, and never invite them to sit down. I picked up my briefcase, the smooth vintage leather cool against my calm palm, and turned my back on the absolute wreckage of my toxic family. I didn't wait for them to call after me. I didn't wait for the inevitable, fake apologies, or the desperate bargaining that I knew would inevitably follow once the initial shock fully wore off. I walked out of the private dining room of my memories, the heavy mahogany doors swinging shut behind me with a satisfying, final thud. The crisp, freezing air of the bright Boston morning hit my face as I stepped out of my luxury building, and for the first time in 34 years I felt utterly weightless. I handed the valet my ticket, smoothly slipping into the comfortable driver's seat of my sleek Porsche, and drove gracefully toward the soaring financial district. I had finally permanently burned their fake, suffocating empire to the absolute ground. And as I looked at the glittering city skyline stretching out beautifully before me, I knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that I would never ever have to look back.